So you want to grow some vegetables or some herbs, but maybe you don't have the garden space, or maybe all you have is a balcony, or maybe you're a first-time gardener, you just want to try your hand at gardening for the first time. Well, today I'm going to show you how to build a quick and easy elevated garden bed that's fairly inexpensive as well. So before we get started with this video, there's two things I do want to talk about. The first being what we talked about in the introduction of this video is why you would need a raised or elevated garden bed. Maybe, again, you don't have the garden space, maybe all you have is a balcony, or maybe you just want something nice on the patio, which is what we're going to do. We're going to put out by the garage where we can enjoy it by the grill, harvest some herbs, harvest some vegetables, and just overall enjoy having a garden out there with the limited space that we have. Now, the second thing I do want to talk about is what type of wood should I be using to build my raised or elevated garden bed. For one, I'm using common pine wood, which will do just fine in the garden and for a short-term period. Now, you could use cedar and redwood, which will last way longer than common pine. The other concern we always get is, can I use pre-treated wood to build my raised or elevated garden beds? You're going to hear a lot of no's, but after months of research, when I built one of these last year with pre-treated wood, I did some research, and before 2003, there were a lot of chemicals that were being used in pre-treated wood that were not suitable for any type of gardening. After 2003, a lot of those chemicals have been banned, and there's minimal leaching to the point where it's not even noticeable at all. So if you want to use pre-treated wood, by all means, go ahead. I'm not telling you not to, but you will hear a lot of no's from many other sources as far as being able to use pre-treated wood in your garden. Now, if you're going to be using pre-treated wood and you have some concerns over chemicals leaching into your soil, one thing you could do is line the bottom with plastic. Another thing you should be doing is replenishing your soil year after year to maintain the nutrients that soil has. One thing with elevated garden beds is when you water over the top, a lot of that stuff just washes out through the bottom. So that's one thing you should be doing year after year. Those are the two things I wanted to talk about before we get started with this project. Let's go ahead and get going building this thing. All right, so for this project, a couple things you will need is, of course, some eye protection. I have my ballistic glasses here, a miter saw, or any saw for that matter, a drill, a couple of clamps, a staple gun, or any staple gun, and I have some screws here. I preferably use the deck screws because they don't rust, and I use the tan color so it looks a little bit nicer. Now, you could use a countersink so you don't split your wood. I will be pre-drilling, so I won't use a countersink for mine. And some hardware cloth. All right, so for the wood, you're gonna need 4 1x3x8 footers, 5 1x6x6 footers. For the cutting list, I'll tell you how many pieces you're gonna need, but the cuts are gonna be 29.5-inch legs, 24-inch sides, and 36-inch front and back panels. Now, the overall dimension for this bed is gonna be 30 inches tall by 28 inches wide and 38 3/4 long. Now, I did do a longer bed earlier this week, and I'll put the pictures up on that, and I'll also give you the dimensions for that as well. But let's go ahead and get started with our cut list, and like I said, I'll put those numbers on top of how many of each you're going to need for each cut. So one thing, of course, I forgot to mention that you absolutely need is a ruler to measure out your cuts, and I'm also using a speed square just to get a nice flat cut. Now, one thing I like to do when I'm cutting my wood is my first cuts are going to be 29.5 inches long for the legs. So when I initially cut the board, I'm going to go ahead and measure out 30 inches. And that's only because I want to cut the ends off to give it a nice flat cut. Sometimes when you buy this wood from the big box stores or the construction stores, you get some wood that's been cut in mass. Sometimes you might get a little bit of unevenness where when you actually build your final product and you sit on the ground, you have a little bit of a wobbly leg or an uneven bottom to it. So we're gonna go ahead and just cut that end off, and then we'll cut it out at 29.5 inches. All right, so a quick tip when cutting your wood, don't forget that your blade cuts 1/8 of an inch off of wood whenever you're making your cuts. So wherever you intend to keep your piece, meaning I'm keeping this side, here's my line, I'm gonna cut this side of the line. That way I keep my even cuts and I don't cut that 1/8 of an inch into my actual wood length. All right, there's cutting the bottom there. So now I have a nice even flat surface on this side and a nice even flat surface on this side. And I'll just continue to make my cuts. I've already made the first initial cut on this one, so I know I have a nice flat side on this side. And then when I make my 29.5 inches here, I'll have a nice flat cut on that side. And I'll just repeat the process with any new wood cuttings that I'm making. All right, so I know you've heard the saying, measure twice, cut once. It's a good saying. What I like to do is I like to measure every single cut that I make, only because if I make all my measurements on one board and start cutting, sometimes we tend to forget that 1/8 inch that we start cutting, and then we end up coming out with shorter pieces of wood than we expected, and it's always mind-boggling when that happens. Now, there may be some of you that are watching and already know this, but I'm keeping the beginner builder in mind so they know exactly what to expect when they start cutting their wood. All right, so now we're done cutting our pieces for our legs. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna cut our panels for the front and back and the sides. All right, so for the 1x6 by 6 footers, you're not gonna be able to get 2 of them out of one board. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut our front panel at the 36-inch mark, and then with the other half, I'm gonna go ahead and cut our side panel at the 24-inch mark. That's gonna leave you with roughly about 12 inches of wood left over. Now that we have all our pieces cut, first thing we're gonna do is start putting together the legs. Now the leg's gonna look like this. It's gonna be an L shape. This is the first leg I already put together. I'm gonna show you guys how exactly I did that. I got 2 of our cuts here and just put them together like this in an L shape. Make sure they're nice and flat and even. Then I'm gonna use 2 clamps, one on each end, just to keep your wood nice and tight and it doesn't move on you when you start drilling into it. Now again, you can use countersinks to make this look a little bit nicer, but there's really no need for it with these deck screws. They're gonna go right into this soft wood. I doubt it, you'll split it. As long as you pre-drill, I'm gonna go ahead and pre-drill these. And I'm only gonna use 2 screws per leg. You can use more than 2, but with as short as this bed is gonna be, only 30 inches tall, there really is no need for more than 3 screws unless you really want it to be secure. This will keep it pretty secure. I've only used 2 screws before. These are decking screws, so it's gonna pretty much keep it nice and tight together. As you can see, that's one leg right there. Continue to do the rest of them. We got 4 of them to put together. All right, so now that we're done with all our cuts, we're gonna go ahead and start putting this bed together. First thing you wanna do is grab your table legs. Now you want the long side to be facing the front and the back. So we're gonna put the long side facing down. We're gonna grab our front panel. You're gonna use 2 for the front panel and the back panel. You go ahead and lay it on the legs. Now one thing I wanna do is I wanna leave a gap because I want the side panel to fit right inside this little gap here so it's nice and tight together. So what I'm gonna use these extra pieces that were left over from the cuts, and we're gonna fit it right inside there, right up against the leg, and square it off even with the legs there. And then same thing on this side, we're gonna insert another. Make sure we have the gap on that side as well. Make sure it's nice and square before you start to drill anything into it. Then we're going to pre-drill our holes in here. All right, once we got that side done, we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing on this side. Make sure it's nice and square and you have that gap still. Then we'll just pull these out. You have that gap right here, and there's our first panel right there. Now we'll continue with the second one. I'll show you guys how to attach the sides to it. All right, so now to attach our side panels, we're gonna go ahead and flip it upside down, make it nice and flat here. We're gonna get our side panels and insert them here where we left that gap. Make sure it fits nice and square and they're both even. Then we're gonna go ahead and pre-drill through this side. There we go, we have one side done. We'll work on the other side and then we'll put it all together. All right, so we're getting our back panel. We'll do the same thing, just make sure it fits nice and snug in the gaps here. All right, once you get the front and back panels aligned and all squared up, you can do the same thing. Just go ahead and pre-drill and drill this all together. And we should be good to go with that part. Now I said you needed 5 2x3 by 8 footers, and the reason for that is what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure the inside of this from here to here. What I have is 22.5 inches, so I'm gonna cut 3 pieces at 22.5 inches and just insert one at the end here, one at the end here, and one right down the center so we can attach our hardware cloth, and we'll get to that once we're done. All right, so I have my 22.5 inch pieces cut here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and insert one on this side, one on this side, and then one right down the center. Now I turned it sideways so you guys can get a better view. I know it's much easier to do it at home. I'm trying to do this in front of the camera. So I'm just trying to give you guys the best view that I possibly can doing this. So the first one right here on the side is I'm just gonna even it up with the bottom here and drill it right into the side panel there. Now you could use a jig to get it right in the corner there. Really not necessary with these deck screws. You can get it right in there with no problems at all. Now the reason I actually drove it in at an angle is because the weight's gonna come this way, and we want that to go ahead and hold steady. It's not going to be that much soil, so I'm not really too worried about it caving in or anything like that. And the hardware cloth is pretty much going to hold the soil in there. Now for the center brace, you can go ahead and screw it from the outside. That's what I'm going to do. You can also do it from the inside, just like the sides. But again, this will hold just as good. All right, now to tie all this together, next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and measure the inside, which is going to give me 36 inches. And then on the sides here, I'm going to measure an inch wider than what it is. So that's going to be about 28 and a half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my last 1x6 by 6 footer. I'm going to rip that down the center on a table saw, and then we're going to cut those to size and place these to give it a little bit of an overhang, and that'll keep it nice and square and tight and from being too wobbly. So we have our pieces cut now. Here's the sides here, and here's the front and back side. One thing you don't want to do is run out of screws, so I'm forced to use some silver screws, but I did want to finish this project for you guys, so I didn't want to run out and go get some of those, but it'll be just fine. I'm not really too worried about the color of the screws. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we won't put the sides on yet because we want to measure those up to the front and back there. So we want to kind of put the front and back overhang just even with the inside of the board here. That way it gives you a little bit of overhang towards the front. Then we're just going to screw that down right into the front panel and the 2x over here. Makes it just a little bit more difficult sitting on top here. There we go. That's the back side. I'm gonna go ahead and do the front side real quick. Again, making sure that's even with the board there. All right, then for the side panels here, those boards right there are just gonna give me just a little bit of room to play with to get this right in there. And that's that for that piece. It gives it a nice looking finish and a nice overhang all around the bed there, and it keeps it nice and sturdy as far as being squared up. So the next thing you're gonna wanna do is cut your hardware cloth down to size so it fits nice and snug inside there. Now I'm not gonna do that on camera because it's tedious to use the wire snips and cut that down. So I'm just gonna go ahead and explain to you guys. When I lay that on the inside, all I do is use a staple gun to tack it down. I cut some extra pieces of wood to lay on top of the braces and screw that down so it keeps that hardware fabric nice and tight. Now another thing you may want to do is throw some linseed oil on there just to bring out the natural shine of the wood. What I like to do is I don't like to sand it or anything. I like to keep it looking rustic, and I like to throw a stain on there. The stain I used on my other bed was a stain called Honey. It has a nice rustic look to it, and that's just something that's preference again that I like to look at when I look at these garden beds out in the garden. Now the cool thing about these beds is you can also make them longer. The one I built a couple weeks ago is actually 6 feet long. The only difference is I didn't cut these down to 36 inches. I left them at 6 feet long and just attach everything the same way I did in this video, and so then you'll have a 6-foot bed. I wouldn't go any bigger than 6 feet unless you plan to put more braces, but 6 feet seems to be about right for an elevated garden bed. So there you have it, guys, a quick and easy elevated garden bed you can build at home. It's much easier to do it at home, trust me. I'm doing this on video, so I'm trying to keep you guys in mind as far as the angles and showing you exactly what I'm doing to put this together. If you enjoyed this build, please give this video a like. Consider subscribing to Garden Obsessions so you can see more of what we're doing. Now I gotta go fill this up with some soil, plant some herbs, and plant some vegetables. That's gonna do it for the video, guys. We'll see you guys in the next one.